Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. Sorry, I kind of look like crap. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels. We are going back to that horrible world known as the JRC, but before we do, the usual disclaimers. Now, I did just kind of want to mention something because everybody's been seeing it around, quiet on set, right? And a lot of questions have been coming up, like, how did we not know these particular types of scenes were sexual as we were kids? A lot of the actors that they're speaking to is in reference to some of those 90s shows. And let me tell you, as an individual that was watching those shows as a kid and usually turned them off quickly in favor of History Channel, I knew those were risque, shall we put it, which is one of the reasons I didn't like watching said shows, and I might see them in a clip for all of 5 minutes. But default then and default now. Fact of the matter is, folks, there was a lot of shit Gen X was watching as kids that we probably shouldn't have been within a 50-foot pole of. TV raised my generation. Okay? To the point that nearly every single last one of us can sit there and tell you how one of the only times when things would quiet down and everybody would shut the hell up in the house is when The Simpsons were on. Okay? There was a reason why people were flipping out over shows like Beavis and Butthead. Okay? We talk about shows, the movies, hell, even the cartoons that we were watching back then. If you look at it through the lens of this generation, paints a pretty bleak picture. Because, folks, the fact of the matter is, yes, we consumed all of that. From risque scenes on teen shows like on Nickelodeon or Disney. From the Beavis and Butthead, the one thing parents could not ignore because it was so blatant that there was no way to really skip over it. Yeah. Yeah, those shows were messed up. There were individuals like myself who knew they were messed up when they were coming out at the time. And we did say something. And the few of us that did say something, let's just say it's one of the many reasons why I was ostracized in school. Okay? We are now living in a situation where people have attempted to overcorrect based off of if you're a Gen Xer and you're just trying to reverse it, and that's not working out either, is it? Because now these kids coming out have absolutely no clue about how the real world actually works. Because we have overcorrected to the point of absolute stupidity since that time period. Okay? What I mean by that is, in particular, when you have groups of individuals ready to pounce on you for simply calling yourself autistic, that's an overcorrection. Okay? When you literally try to dictate by as though you're trying to fill a quota when you're casting for a film or for a show. And it's no longer being based really on anything else. That's an overcorrection. The idea is to find a common sense, logical, coherent solution in the middle. Because Gen X was not a generation that was protected. We weren't. You ever watch the X Games? There was teenager versions of the exact same shit. You had kids willfully, with their parents' full knowledge, going out on bikes and jumping ditches 3 feet across. You have knowing teenagers literally, and I remember this distinctly, jumping off of roofs. Okay? There was no safety net. Point blank. But the idea isn't now that we now need to overcorrect and micromanage everything. There should be a middle ground where we're not overcorrecting, but also so there's an actual goddamn safety net there for those kids when they need us the goddamn most. There should be people on these sets whose whole job has only to do with the oversight of the safety of the kids and to act as therapist when needed, to be only there as an advocate for the kids, to not care about these show creators' bottom lines. Their job, in my ideal world that will probably never exist, is that their sole purpose on set is to make sure no lewd crap is being forced on those kids to perform on those shows, to help them deal with anything they might be going through, bullying, whatever might be, and to also act on set as a mandated reporter, something that these old shows lacked profoundly. You know what I mean? A mandated reporter, if you worked in mental health or in healthcare, you know what this is. This is in regards to someone who works for the state or works for a group home or service provider who, when they witness abuse, they are 100% responsible. I am, was, and probably will be for the foreseeable future responsible to reporting to the proper authorities when it looks like abuse and neglect or childhood SA is going on. Okay? Again, that person should be separate from the studio, hired as almost like a consultant basis, if you will. They're there to be the child's advocate. No connection to the studios, to be there purely for the good of the kid. What that does, folks, is it provides a safe haven for the kids. You know that this person is not affiliated with the corporation that essentially milks their pet pedophile as a cash cow. They're there specifically for you. They are a safe haven to report any kind of foulness that might be going on set so that they can relay that information to the proper authorities. This is already a well established thing within healthcare and mental health care. We're all mandated reporters just for this type of shit. Exactly. Okay? I think that would by far go a far lot further than this absolute overcorrection that has been taking place over the last 2 decades as Gen X has aged out of the young adult era and have come more into our middle age. So that we're not sheltering kids from life itself. But at the same time, we can make sure that they are being protected, that there is one person in that entire fucking corporation that is there specifically for the kids, and to act also as a mandated reporter when the situation calls for it is a lot better of overcorrecting. Trying to force the PC culture that my whole entire generation rebelled against, that's not an answer. Practical steps can be taken. Practical steps that could have been in place that would have protected those kids were not there during the time. Not just for the entertainment industry, but out in the real world as well. Providing that safety net, giving that one individual whose sole job is to look after you and your best interest would probably put a stop to a whole lot of shady shit. And before you individuals come on here and tell me, but they can't, their parents again, I've worked this field how many years now? We've been going over the JRC for how long now? How many times have we heard the parents' excuses and the out and out downright lies that they spout in favor of the JRC? Not everybody deserves to be a parent. In particular, when you're in a situation where you can see that these kids had absolutely no adults in their household or otherwise that they could go to, you see why I am arguing the necessity of having a child advocate there, completely separated and unaffiliated with Nickelodeon, except to do the job to actually keep the kids safe. It's a practical, it's logical, but unfortunately, we don't live in a logical world. Everybody wants to make emotional, rash ass decisions and then get confused when it all blows up in their face. I'm probably going to get hate for this, but if it were me, as a corrective action, I would make sure, if that were my job, if I were in charge of that show or head of the guy, if I'm the boss person, I would make sure that a child advocate, preferably one from one of the many centers of independent living, would be there with the sole purpose of safeguarding the kids. Their job is to not give a shit about the show, not to give a shit about profits, not give a shit about trying to push risque shit to get more clicks. Their job is to safeguard the child. Because as this documentary has proven, you can't fucking trust every single parent to do their job, apparently, anymore. So you got to have that person there in lieu, because a lot of these parents coming out on this documentary didn't rock the boat because rocking the boat also rocked the bank account. All right, folks, let's get into where we are with the JRC. All right, folks, if you're unfamiliar with the Stop the Shocks campaign or the campaign against the troubled teen industry, you're going to find all the pertinent links right there in the description box. Please, in particular, take note of the article written by NeuroClastic, a small non-for-profit started by autistics for autistics. In it, they interviewed over 900 ABA professionals in regards to the JRC's so-called behavior modification program. The Judge Rotenberg Educational Center doesn't want you to read that article so much. They threatened NeuroClastic with a defamation lawsuit. They did not remove it from the website. NeuroClastic refused, so you know the drill. Please read the article. Share it on all your social media. Also included in there is NeuroClastic's public statement regards to the defamation lawsuit threat, as well as a link to their GoFundMe. We are crowdfunding just in case the JRC ever does actually see through with its threat. Trigger warning 1: when we discuss places like the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center or Agape Boarding School for Boys, you're going to hear vivid descriptions of and catch clips of surveillance footage of people with mental health issues and disabled people being tortured and abused. If you got young children present, please go ahead and utilize those headphones, all right? Trigger warning 2: this channel is marked not for kids for a reason. We use profanity on occasion and we do speak on dark subjects. If your child is 16 and younger and they are watching this, very obviously parental supervision is very much advised, all right? All right, folks. Let's get to where we left off yesterday, shall we? I'm sorry for that rant, but mother of God, there are middle of the road solutions that make sense and will have an actual impact. And then there's all the emotional backlash I'm saying. And you should get angry. You should be emotional. I'm not telling you to not be. It is horrifying. It was horrifying across the board for Gen X. Look to some of the crap all of us lived with, for God's sake. The idea shouldn't be overcorrective action to essentially squeeze what little bits of actual entertainment are still. You get what I'm saying, right? The answer isn't overcorrection, it's practical, logical solutions. Having a child advocate, a professional mandated reporter there on set would have stopped a whole lot of shady shit, particularly if the child advocate doesn't answer to corporate Nickelodeon, if they answer to their own office. Okay? That kind of pressure of taking your job doesn't exist in a world where a child advocate is there on set at all times and they're beholden to their bosses and not Nickelodeon. Okay? Just saying. So, where we were, all right? The comment also apparently misunderstands the FDA's reference to an article in turn, refers to an earlier edition of the DSM. The DSM 3R, originally published in 1987, specified that the person must have witnessed or experienced a serious threat to life or physical well being, but the current DSM-5 contemplates a wider spectrum of events that may be traumatic and other, more indirect ways to experience traumatic events, thereby broadening criteria. To give you an idea of what that looks like, is essentially those of us who lived through 9/11, lived in that moment, that time period. When I tell you collectively, the United States, the adults during the time, were absolutely trauma glued to their TV. The fact that I can tell you that they literally stopped functioning, were constantly staring at the TV in shock and in grief, where it literally paralyzed them, in spite of the fact that they were not physically there or running from the fires or the smoke. That was a collective trauma event, even though those who were watching for the TV could say that they were not directly being affected. Seeing those images and living in the fear of what those images produced in us during that time period, that's what the DSM-5 is referring to. You were not witnessing directly inside of New York the event that happened that day. You were nowhere near New York, out in the middle of the country, like Southwest Missouri, for example. But in spite of the fact that that is true, Any of us who remember our parents from that time and how traumatized and paralyzed that they were because of those events and because that threat of further violence, which we all expected at the time, especially about 2 days in, I remember specifically, it affected them. It paralyzed them. And some adults, I would dare even say that it has contributed to their PTSD. Okay? Just to give you a better idea of what's going on. Now, to continue to use that example, not only threatened traumas, because we all felt we were living under threat. We did not think it would stop with the Pentagon and the Twin Towers at the time. Everybody feared escalation after that. Okay? Everybody. 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 All right? Which can be just as traumatizing and psychologically damning as some of the physical issues we're talking about, right? Meaning that the event has not actually occurred. So, no, there was not really more attacks, but 9/11 created an environment where literally just the fear of it paralyzed a few people. Some of us are defiant bitches just by who we are. But you get what I'm saying here. Okay. I hope that was a decent reference. Not only does an ESD patient experience the trauma of a severe pain, which can be a criterion A event, but the device is attached to the patient's body, constantly threatening additional trauma. Exactly. It doesn't get more clear than that, folks. Even trying to make that argument doesn't make sense because the JRC is directly, admittedly, causing physical harm and pain to be inflicted on a student who has zero control over it. And because that machine is attached to them, it really is a sword of Damocles. You never know when they're going to strike and over what they're going to strike about. All right? That doesn't cause you PTSD. I don't know, man. You must be Superman. I don't know. The FDA's reference to the article helps illustrate the evolution of the diagnostic criteria and supports the risk of developing PTSD symptoms. At the end of the day, even arguing in regards to the earlier DSMs, if you read that from the DSM 3, guess who still qualifies for diagnostic criteria for PTSD, even back as far as 1987's definition? That's right, the JRC kids. Because we can say, with video surveillance footage to prove it, nonetheless, that what they done has caused physical harm, psychological harm, and that never ending feeling of Damocles sword over your neck that, as most of us survivors can tell you, remains there for the rest of our goddamn existence. All right? Just saying. In short, a contemporary understanding of trauma associated with PTSD or its symptomology supports that these risks of receiving shocks from the device. Thank you. Okay? Thank you. And I feel like that should be the end of the argument because even if you want to argue about the earlier definitions, we're talking DSM 3, DSM 4 here in particular. even with those definitions, the JRC survivors still qualify for the PTSD diagnosis because they were directly physically attacked repeatedly. Repeatedly, folks, repeatedly. And essentially wore that shock device as a modern Damocles sword. So, even trying to argue in regards to former definitions of that diagnosis, your argument still falls flat because they still meet all the criteria for that diagnosis, even as far back as the literal DSM that came out in 1987, all right? I don't think you could be more clear than that. We're going to close up, folks. We don't get very many views on this channel. The few we do tend to get removed from time to time. So, folks, please don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe, and please don't forget to hit those comments. I appreciate your time. As always, folks, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. I'll see you in a few minutes. Bye-bye, everyone.